Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Snap No Tap podcast. Tony Cecchine here, along with you know who, the great, beyond great, the ultimate Joe Cardinal. And it got me to thinking. I mean, birds are named after you. Priests are named after you. Shit, baseball teams are named after you. I mean, is there any limits to your greatness? Or is this, does it keep going and going?
You know, it's hard not to let that go to your head, but it's important for me. It's always a daily routine to try and stay humble, realize it's not just about me, that, maybe these things are named for other reasons. I just try to have that fantasy in my head that it's not all about me and centered. And, obviously interacting with you helps keep me humble, the font of wisdom that you are and the great entertainer that you are, the center, really the spiritual center of this podcast, Tony Cecchine.
Oh, I'm like the sun. Yeah. Well, one thing I've learned, cardinal rule, is that we cannot go on unless we, tell the truth about you. I mean, it's like, listen, I know that you've done this on your own for your whole life, but isn't it better when somebody like myself exposes you instead of you walking around exposing yourself?
There's definitely a lot less liability. Yes. And I appreciate that. And to your point, there's also cardinal sins.
Yeah. Well, we don't have enough time for that. But speaking of time, I received a great email from a great guy, William D. And I promised him that I was going to address his question on the email tonight on the podcast. That was before I was informed that we had a special guest. So I mentioned this to Joe, William. I'm not going to let you hang. I'm going to touch on it just briefly. But next week's podcast, the whole damn podcast, is going to be based on your email. And I'll read the email next week. But in essence, basically what it's about is, the adrenaline and dealing with real world situations and altering or setting up your training to handle that. And frankly, the way the martial arts schools are set up, they're not set up for that at all, period. It's just not, because the schools are set up as a business. And we're going to get into that, William, and everybody else. As most of you who know me know, I was lucky. I never was taught in a martial arts school, and my whole life before, during, and after was all based on streets awareness, street self-defense. But I do want to address the psychological issues. I will say this. A few years ago, a few months ago, we had Scott Gave on the podcast. We've had Jason Bender on the podcast several times. Well, they're both sensational martial artists, athletes. I've trained both of those guys. Okay. They had a match against each other 3-4 years ago, whatever it was, before the pandemic that I was at. And, it's a weird scenario for me because I've trained both of these guys. But let me just say this to William and all those others that are, really all about self-defense. Your training cannot ever be for one split second about hanging out and having drinks or beers with your quote unquote opponent afterwards. Okay. Now, Scott and Jason didn't necessarily have beers, but the point is they hugged, they shook hands, they love each other. No, your training has to be for people that you really have to get into your head that I may have to kill this person. I mean, literally, not exaggerating, not hyperbole. I have to kill. Okay, so you got everything that you're doing now has to be abandoned completely, and you got to focus on killing, being able to do that. Okay, and nothing else. If you're having fun in games, you're in the wrong place. If you're learning all about sportsmanship, you're definitely in the wrong place. Okay, for this type of training that William is asking about. You're definitely in the right place if you're looking for sport or you're looking for a hobby or something. So anyway, we're going to get into that. We're going to spend the whole doggone podcast next week because it's an important issue. And the martial arts world, in my opinion, has reached a critical stage. And it's been there for a while, but it's critical because there is no more martial. Okay. There's very few martial things going on here. It's sport. And once again, nothing wrong with that. Let's label it what it is. It's a sporting gym. But yeah, we'll get into that next week. But we're going to have a return guest that nobody's seen before because of technical difficulties. I'm going to let Joe take it away. Joe Cardinal, have it.
Well, welcome Jesse Kulla to the show. I'm going to have a hard time not just saying welcome back because we had a conversation before. It's going to be one of our famous or infamous lost episodes. But we're
say welcome back Kulla, kind of like welcome back Cotter. Remember that?
It's true. I'll take it.
Yeah.
That show had one of the best theme songs of all time, by the way.
John Sebastian. Yep.
Yeah, great tune. Also, so yeah, Jesse, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Well, it's good to be here. It's very good to be here. Hang on one second here. Keep it down, guys. I'm recording. So we're actually at the gym today.
So yeah, let's talk about the gym. So you are one of the head instructors at Forteza Martial Arts and Fitness. Yep. We've had actually Greg Millay, who is one of the founders of Forteza. He was on episode, I'm going to plug our episode 102 if you want to go back and listen to that. A great episode where he explains things. But just for people, just, maybe missed that episode, can you first describe the school and describe the style and the things they teach there?
I'll give you the quickie version here. So we're doing historical European martial arts. We're an Italian shop, so we're doing reconstructed martial arts from the old days, from 600-700 years ago in Europe, and most of it's sword fighting. I got people sword fighting down. It's Friday night, so it's sparring night. So I got about 15 people downstairs who are off to hit each other with crowbars because we use steel swords. They're two-handed swords, one-handed swords. You wear a little bit of padding, a little bit of protective gear, and you go to town. It's not gentle. It doesn't hurt any less than boxing used to hurt, certainly. There's, bumps, bruises, the occasional cracked bone. And it does have a grappling element because our school teaches that wrestling is the fundamental of all martial arts coming out of Europe. So whether you're doing boxing or knife fighting or sword fighting, it doesn't matter. It all comes from the same cultural root. That's where all the footwork comes from. I've been with the club since '99. I met Greg when I was a teenager. I was about 19 years old. And a buddy of mine had said, I've been doing other strip mall martial arts, taekwondo, stuff like that. And he's like, dude, you gotta meet this guy. You're gonna love it. So I hopped a bus. I came up to Chicago. And I remember the day very clearly because Greg went, oh, God damn it, another teenager. And proceeded to beat the snot out of me. But I kept coming back, and after a while, I was like, well, I guess I got to teach you. I can't get rid of you, so I guess I got to teach you. And it formed a partnership that's lasted through till now. And it's been a fun ride, taking me all over the world, from here to Europe and back a few times. I've fought in tournaments in Belarus. I've taught in England a few times, and it's been good times.
That's awesome. And a lot of people, I think it's starting to get attention now, but that there is European martial arts. I mean, obviously everybody thinks of current skill sets like modern wrestling, modern boxing. Maybe they've heard of Savate or Olympic fencing, but they don't realize that there is, there is people now investigating, and this is kind of a worldwide community kind of exploring and trying to I should say redevelop. I don't know what the right term is, because really resurrect these skills that were, on the verge of being lost forever.
We're doing our best, but resurrection is a very generous way to look at it. I would say redevelop and keep the spirit alive as best we can, because we don't know what they were doing. These guys wrote books 600 years ago. They drew some pictures and try to describe those pictures with their words. But at the end of the day, there's no lineage that connects back. There's not a guy who learned from a guy who learned from a guy. The closest thing we've really got is like Biddle's Cold Steel, because Colonel Biddle, who taught the Marines during World War II, he claimed to have learned a lot of his knife fighting when he was a young man from some guy he met at a gym. Because in the old days, the 1920s, 1800s, you go to a gym in that era, and it was just like, well, you might lift some weights, you might go for a run, you might go on the jungle gym, you might just randomly pick up a sword and fence some bro, or just, hey, dude, you look like a wrestler. You want to wrestle, man? And they had mats in the corner, and you just go do it. It was a different culture. It was a very engaged culture, and so that's where he learned it. And he supposedly learned it from some guy who taught it in Louisiana back in the 1800s. But the traditions belong to every generation, brand new, right? So like what I've learned from wrestling over the years, I've reassembled from what I learned here, what I've put together from old books, what I've learned from a little bit from Greco-Roman wrestlers, what I've learned from guys who used to do judo, and built something in the style of what used to exist. And I think it is pretty close. And I think I've got a product that holds up and can, like, I don't know if I keep up with Tony, but I'm not an easy guy to put into the ground. I'm not an easy guy to put a lock on. And am I the best? Hell no. But am I pretty good? Eh, I'm willing to put myself out there and let you find out.
So what are the styles called? What's the actual terminology?
So the Italian material, there the word for martial arts is armazzare, which just means the use of weapons, the skill of using weapons. And there's abrazare, the art of embracing, which is what they call wrestling. And the Italian boxing traditions are kind of a subcategory of abrazare. And there are some Italian boxing traditions, but they were considered pretty low class in the medieval times and the Renaissance, because you get your face all tore up all the time. Like getting yourself ugly for money is something that poor people do. So not many books were written about it, but there are references to it and anecdotal material and some folk boxing that survives coming out of Italy, oddly through like the crime families. So they preserved their fighting systems. They had their own training methods for their people. And there's a couple guys going around right now talking to these 70, 80-year-old dudes who were part of the crime families in Italy back in the 40s and 50s, and asking them what they were taught as young men, and taking video of it and recording it and asking these guys about their experiences. That's the closest thing to a living tradition we've got. And that's all knife fighting and boxing for the most part. And it's dirty. It is dirty as hell.
So when we're talking weapons, just to give people kind of a picture of like the era of weapons. So obviously the most common one is probably people know is the long sword, right? That's like a two-handed sword that you'd see a knight maybe use. Got a visual display here for those watching on YouTube.
Yeah, we got one right here just sitting next to me on the pillar. So this one's about 4 feet long. It's a hand and a half. Usually got another inch or so of handle from this era, but they're a sword. And a small subset of my school actually gets the armor out, and we wrestle and sword fight in armor with the idea of getting past the armor. Wrestling in 80 pounds of armor sucks. You have no body feel. You know, you can't feel the other guy's body against your body because the armor's in the way. And like it's all smooth metal, so like when you're body to body, it just slides around, and then your elbows get stuck in the hinges of their elbows, and it's really weird. So that's kind of its whole own thing.
Yeah, I knew somebody, I had a friend of mine that actually got half of his foot completely sliced off, completely amputated from a knife, from a sword like that. I was actually with my girlfriend at the time when I introduced her to him, and she asked me straight out, because he was walking funny, he was limping like that. She says, why is he limping like that? I says, well, because he's got a foot and a half. And she ended up breaking up with me and going out with him.
I mean, you know
Yeah,
how many
well,
how
shit happens, you know.
and romance is it's a series of misinterpretations, right?
Yeah.
But one thing people won't appreciate, in full disclosure, so I've trained at Forteza, and that's why I'm really excited to have some of the instructors here. At first, my impression, obviously, I kind of from the outside coming in and coming from, more, I would say, kind of like a fight sport background, kickboxing, grappling, what have you. Although I did have some weapons through Thai martial arts, but looking at it, before looking at it and before getting involved in it, my assumption was, well, this is kind of like, the SCA cosplay, guys playing with swords, and, that was kind of what my thought
What's
was.
SCA? You said SCA. What is that? What is that?
Well, that's the Society for Creative Anachronism. Basically, it's guys who go out and they play like they dress up and they have like big fests like they're in medieval times. It's it's kind of like a not world. Well, you have World War II recreationist or
Yeah, it's like that.
recreationist people. They have a hobby, whatever they're into the uniform.
Revolutionary War thing.
Exactly.
Civil War enactments. Okay.
Yeah, so all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I didn't realize, no, this is something that's researched and practical. And for me, what was very interesting, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, Jesse, but the first thought, if you're self-defense minded, is, I don't know if I'm going to get in a longsword fight in the near future. If I get into a longsword fight in the street, that's going to be a weird path to get there. Like, so I've made some very weird choices in my life, but I'll say this, knowing how to use a two-handed lever, how to, see, the term fencing always, I think for most people, especially when they think in terms of Western, is always either fencing, like sword fighting, true sword
They
fighting.
think about car antennas, yeah.
Right. But for me, some of the moves we were doing and it really felt like, oh, this very well could be a crowbar or a baseball bat in my hands.
Absolutely. I mean, a stick is a stick at the end of the day. And creating kinetic energy to wallop somebody is important if you're the root of, especially on the Italian side of the mountains, because most of the books that have survived are either in German language or Italian language. There's a couple in English, but they're essentially useless because the specific terminology of that fencing lineage is dead, and there's no Rosetta Stone, so we don't know what a hawk is, we don't know what a rounder is, we don't know what that means. So we can read the words, but like, what is that cut? What is that punch? We don't know because like he says, give him 2 rabbits and a rounder. We're like, what? That language died away in the 1400s or 1500s and was replaced with French. So anyway, when we get into like how to give somebody a good hit, is how to give somebody a good hit. And if you're we talk about hammer fists and punches in our wrestling program because Fiore, our oldest book, he talks about wrestling. He's like, yeah, you learned how to wrestle when you were a kid. I'm not showing you that. This is for what you do in a war when somebody's trying to murder you. This is what you do when you're the local tax man and the peasant gets mad, doesn't want to pay his taxes and jumps you in the restaurant. He's talking about like self-defense situations and life-threatening wrestling. So he's talking about like putting that fist to the guy hard and cruelly. And he says, do it in this way to cause the most damage and pain. If you're going to hit a guy, it has to cause damage and pain and put fear into him after you've done it. If you're going to grab a guy, is to get a true advantage in that moment. And if you don't know how to do that, don't grab the guy. Because if he knows anything, he's going to do it to you better than you're doing it to him. And talks about those kind of issues in his book. But throwing that nice punch, right? Getting a good hit, it's the same with the sword. It's the same hip mechanics, same shoulder mechanics. If I want to put a guy in like a front throw, it's the same shoulder mechanic, same hip mechanic, it's the same footwork. So, like, if you're learning sword fighting from us, you're also learning how to do a hip throw. You're also learning how to do a good, like, figure four lock. You're also learning how to throw a good punch because it's the same method of generating wallop, of generating a hard, fast hit.
What I also appreciate too is what's kind of interesting is take away whatever the weapon is. It could be anything, knife, sword, whatever. There is kind of an analysis of, and I think like a lot of people were familiar with like reading, I think Bruce Lee tapped into this. I think he began to realize that fencing had a way of organizing and looking at fighting. Concepts like regaining initiative. That has nothing to do with a specific sword technique, but it is something. If you've lost initiative in a fight, you need to figure out how to regain it. It's one thing. So there's kind of these higher concepts or timing and measure. These things are universal to fighting.
They are. They really are. And I like the language that we use to talk about them. I think it's a very developed language that lets you, once you kind of learn how we talk about it, it's very easy to put training into context when we're training on the floor and doing different things. The way I talk about wrestling is exactly the same way I talk about sword fighting, is exactly the same way I talk about boxing. And in my mind, those ideas are very closely linked together. I don't think of them as different things. So when we're getting in there, like, when you need to teach somebody else, you need to be able to address, at least to a certain degree, to talk about timing. If you have no words to describe it, it can be hard to show a guy how to do it. And that's the one thing our school is particularly good at, is we're able to articulate how we get things done, and we can show you, this is how I did that thing. Now, what Tony was talking about earlier of keeping things real, there comes a point when you just got to get down and dirty and do it. And one of the reasons I like our school is we've kept wrestling as part of our sword fighting. So if you get too close, we don't hug and reset. We get too close, I'm going to put your ass in the dirt. I'm going to put you in a hip throw. I'm going to put you in a figure four and wait. And we tap here like you do in jiu-jitsu, because you need a training tool so you don't jack your partners up all the time. And there's certain holds we don't allow in class because you can't tap fast enough to get out of it before it hurts you. And I don't say that to brag. It's just, you get somebody bent the right way. If you push past that, it's going to go, right? Like, there's a certain point.
We call a hook, and catch. If you throw it, it's like throwing a punch. If it lands, it's done. And that's thus the name of the podcast, Snap No Tap. If you apply these in a certain way, there's not, in training, if you know you're heading into it, you can head it with a different pace and more control, but they are definitely designed for, if you want to take it to 11,
you just do it.
Right.
You just do it. And that's, actually, we got to get Tony out here one of these days to go through some catch with our guys, because I think it'd be really healthy for us. It's something I want to do, and I realized when we lost that episode in between, I'm like, easier than me going to Tony. What if I just got Tony to come here and got like 20 guys together and had a thing? And that
a little seminar. Set it up. I'm in.
Yeah, we'll talk. We're going to talk for sure, because I talked to the boss about it too, and he's like, he is 100%. But that's the thing, is you snap into any kind of, we call them tie-ups, but a hold, a hook, whatever you want to call it, you snap into it like you're throwing a punch. If you don't want the other guy to get up when you're done, or if you want to win the fight, you just throw it, and it doesn't stop. when the old man was writing his book 600 years ago, he talks about getting an underhook at the elbow, and he's like, just break the guy's arm. He's like, if his arm's straight and he lets you get here, just try to break it. If the guy knows anything, he'll push forward, he'll push so you can't break it. He'll move his elbow, and then he's like, if he goes in, here's how you put him in a hold. If he runs away, here's how you put him in a hold. But try to break his arm first and see what he does. And if you get it, hey, fight's over. Great, good job. And the threat will, we're big on using threats to get people to go to other places. So like, I will attack an opponent. If they're lousy at it, I get them. If they're good at fighting, they'll do something about it. But that puts them in a box. Now they can only do one or two things about any problem that I cause. If I know they're easy solutions, I can attack into those solutions. And we are very much attack into the attack, into the attack, into the attack. Defense is for when you've screwed up and now you've got to like get your crap back together and get to a safe spot. But it's, block the first one and then it's attack all the way down the rabbit hole until you win or until they stop you for good.
Well, Tony talks about that as far as being no one move is, you can't assume one move is the end. It's a means to an end.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons that I really like, I'm familiar with Tony's career to a certain degree, and I'm familiar with his catch wrestling to a degree, and I'm always been a fan because of that mentality of like, just gonna attack into an attack. And as people try to defend, you kind of know what defenses are going to come up, or at least the ones that are quick, the ones that are predictable. And if they do something unpredictable, it's probably slow and inefficient. If they don't do the easy fix, that means they're doing it the hard way. And that's almost always slow or telegraphed or too big. Doesn't leave them in a good spot to prosecute.
At the root of it all, even like with boxing or wrestling, my style, it really is all counterpunching to a degree, meaning that when you're out of your guard, your turtle shell, where technically you're the safest, once you start any kind of offense, you become vulnerable. You have to know this. That's why good boxers can counter a jab and slip and counter or whatever. Same with these moves. So it's and as a skilled fighter, you want your opponent, you want to break them out of their shell. You want them to give you some energy so you can, annihilate them.
Yep, it's vital. It's vital, and I think that mindset, I think, is to any true wrestling, any true fighting, where you're thinking about, because you might spend your whole life training, but if you're training to fight, then you're thinking that way. And when you reach out to do anything to the other guy, you got to know where you're vulnerable in that moment. And that knowledge lets you counterpunch. And I see, man, the stuff I learned when I was a kid, it did not teach me good counterpunching. It just got me kicked a lot, got me punched a lot.
Yeah, counter strikes are important. Yeah, there's so much that can be taken from the sports world, like the competitive world, of course, but also there's detriments to that, both psychologically and technically, because no matter what, the idea, be it boxing or some sort of a wrestling situation, competitive wrestling, is to win the match, either by dominance or by the rules, playing the rules to your favor, running out the clock or whatever. We see this in football. We see this in basketball, hockey, anything with a time limit. So my training was always, you have no time in the street. Okay. When you go to when I was boxing, you have time limits. That's awesome. In the street, you got to look at it like it's got to be over now. You just too many variables.
Right. You can't let it drag out.
You cannot. And that's why I was always opposed to the original Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu philosophy of, oh, just take your time. You got all the time in the world. No, you don't. Not in a real street fight. Challenge match when it's you and him in the middle of the, of the wheat field. Okay, go for it. But in reality, no, you got to get this ASAP. Let's do it. That's how it's always been.
It is. I mean, that with the sword fighting material, we look at that from a dueling point of view, and the old guys talk about like, oh, you've agreed to show up to this duel. What are you going to do? Well, if everybody's got a sharp sword, if you actually step into that ring with that weapon, like you can't be unaware of your own mortality at that point, right?
Yeah.
It creates a lot of psychological pressure, and the Italian system of fencing kind of takes that into account. It is a forward pressure style where it's like, get control of that guy's sword. Put him in a box where there's only one way out. Know what the hell that way out for him is. So that if I get control and he takes the one way out, that's the end of the fight. And if he just runs away a lot, I just stand in the middle. Be like, look, man, you're afraid of me. Great. You can leave this duel. Take your shame with you. It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't need to kill you for you to live in shame, man. And a lot of duels ended that way. One guy would get dominant, and well, the Italians also had a habit of like, okay, the duel is only going to last until the sun goes down, and you show up like 6 minutes before sunset, so that nobody has to get killed, because otherwise someone's going to get killed. It's a sharp sword. There's no, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, right? But it takes into that account. You've got to get forward pressure. You've got to attack into the situation. You've got to attack into control and try to make the other guy predictable as much as you humanly can to avoid getting killed. And right now our kids are downstairs practicing for a tournament, and that creates the same thing. You step into a 15-foot circle. If you don't control that circle, you're going to lose. And people ramp up a little bit. And since we're playing with 4-foot crowbars, if everybody's nerves are hot, like, you're gonna get your hands broken if you don't play smart. Because the safety gear only takes you so far. It hurts to lose in this martial art. And that's keeps us a little bit honest, because it hurts to lose sometimes. You get a guy who's swinging for the fences, your safety gear ain't gonna keep your bones whole. There was a tournament 2 weeks ago, or 1 week ago, up in Minnesota. They had, I don't know how many guys were fighting. I want to say it was about 60 guys were fighting total. They had 3 concussions, 3 broken hands, several cases of broken ribs. Like, that's a lot, but they were just amped up. They were going. And, the guy who won didn't have a scratch on him because he took it serious, made sure he didn't get his ass kicked. The guys who went in all reckless, man, you get hurt. And that's just a fun tournament. You're getting broken ribs. Ugh.
Well, that's the thing too with like a lever, because you could put so I have sparred there, and I've sparred just with nylon, which, like, imagine hard plastic, a solid plastic 4-foot, and against a girl too. And I think it was almost because she didn't appreciate how strong she would be with that lever, and maybe because out of fear, so there's kind of, sometimes, at least if you've played baseball or you've done things, the minute you have your hands on there, you kind of know how much power you can, some people do, they can sense. Other people, maybe if they're new to that kind of a thing, maybe can't sense the amount of power you can generate, how much that amplifies the power of the human body once you put a long lever in it. And one of the worst bruises I ever got was from that girl. She clipped my arm, and she was, swinging for the fences, so to speak. And I have a picture, I should probably post it, but my arm was, like, worse than any, round kick I ever took from the, you can, like I said, if you swing with your full body behind it, even like a nylon sword, and that's why it doesn't surprise me. I mean, like, yeah, that.
Oh yeah.
God forbid your thumb takes that with like a metal sword or something like that. That thumb is gone.
I mean, I've broken every finger I own. I've broken every single finger I own doing this, and a couple wrestling as well. But, like, you're vulnerable, and if you do this long enough, and if you go, like, in the old days, 20 years ago when this was newer, Like we used to have to go and people would be like, "Hey man, I heard you do sword fighting. Why don't you come up to where I'm at and like try me on?" And you try people, some of those guys were cool and you could play and they weren't gonna on purpose mess you up. And some of those guys, they would on purpose mess you up. And you didn't know until you got there and you were in the mix with them which of those two things that guy was gonna be. Because I've had some real sweet talkers and then they're trying to freaking rip my eyes out. And I've had some guys who were just plain boring blue collar dudes who were like, "Nah, I don't trust anything I can't test." But they actually were very well mannered when we got down to a fencing because they were just here to honestly test themselves and they didn't need to take it past we have a what's the word for it? If I said uncle, they said great, and that was it. And if there's some guys, they were here to show you why you sucked and they wanted to prove it on your body. So the old days we had to be very careful. Nowadays this is becoming more mainstream. So, and I think also like people in their 30s and 20s like didn't grow up with bullies that like would kick their butts for the most part. Like, I remember like I think it was like 1985 was like the first time somebody like really kicked my butt. I was like 5.5 years old. And I went to the bus stop and there was an eighth grader and he wasn't having the kindergartners. The moms weren't around at the bus stop. They said, "Go to school, kid," you know? And you had to be careful because some of the older kids would knock you around. You learned real fast, like which older kids were safe, which ones weren't, how not to get knocked around. And so I knew what a punch could do growing up. I knew what a baseball bat did to somebody. It never happened to me too badly, but it happened to some kids, and you're like, "Ah, oh, okay, that's just bad things to people. I don't want any of that." But you meet a 20-year-old who's never swung a punch in his life, never wrestled, never gotten his butt kicked as a kid, picks up the 4-foot crowbar, just like, "Oh, okay," gives you everything he's got. You're like, it's easy not to know your own strength if you've never tested it. And like Tony was saying earlier, there's sports and there's training for fighting, and people tend to call both martial arts, but they're not necessarily the same thing. There's martial arts, and then there's martial arts, and then there's arts,
Yeah.
and they all get labeled similarly to the general public, and it's easy not to know what you're buying if you have, especially if you've never done anything that before. You're a kid and you're like, "Oh, this strip mall taekwondo school is just as good as doing MMA, right?" Sure. This MMA is just as good as training, training catch with a guy who's actually had some fights and had to deal with some problems. And those are not the same thing. And the mindset of what you're training for too. Like we talk about knife fighting around here. It's really boring to watch. But, for those of us who've been around the block, you'll look at that and say, okay, that actually has a decent chance of holding up under problems. And I'll see other guys doing like some fancy knife fighting stuff, and I'm like, one of my coaches was talking about a martial art he didn't like, and he just looks, he's like, "Right, mate, that's about as tough as a paper condom." And some people could tell the difference and some people can't.
Yeah.
And some people are selling one as the other, either, in my opinion, maliciously, like they know what they're selling and they don't care, or they've drank their own Kool-Aid and they
Yep.
have no perspective.
Well, and it's the same in conditioning circles too, because you may be very physically fit in one thing or one area. Let's say like powerlifting. Okay.
Yeah.
You're the strongest man around, Now you go into something that's more cardio based, you're going to probably bomb out. You know, you're going to gas out.
Yeah.
It's just difference. You know, but you're right. I've always had a problem with people who market themselves as something that they're not. Like this is a deadly this or that. No, it isn't.
It's very dishonest.
Yeah, and well, you know what? And if it's all fun and games, that's fine. But when you're potentially, when you can cost somebody their life, I mean, it's not good to lose a competition either. Your heart might
No.
get broken, but I'd rather your heart get broken than your skull or you know, some shit like that. And that bothers me, always has, because you know, I've known people who've lost their lives in the street. You don't want to ever see that happen.
No, no. And I've had some good coaches over the years, and some people who've faced true adversity out there in the street and had to apply their fighting skills to problematic situations. And it was very clear to me the difference in their perspective from some other people that I've been to seminars with, and some other people where I've walked into their school, trained for a couple days, and just left. Because like, well, okay. And you know, I've had to deal with some adversity. I've never had too big of a problems put in right in front of me. But I've been knocked down more than once, and I've knocked a few people down more than once, and that gave me perspective to what I teach here. When I'm teaching kids to wrestle, I'm like, hey, you know, this is a wrestling program. We're going to have some fun. We're going to learn how to do throws. We're going to learn some takedowns. We're going to learn some tie-ups. And, you know, if you guys want to come in and work really hard and like really go at it, we've got some times for that. And that'll be in the direction of self-defense. But like, if you guys want to come in and like put on a training knife and like go really hard and like really have us come at you, like that's a sometimes thing. And not everybody's here for that, because we had a martial arts school. We got to pay the bills. We got to keep the lights on. So I can only find a handful of people who really want to train hard, who really want to sink those locks in deep, who really want to fall down 100 times to get good at both throwing somebody but also taking the throw. Guys who want to make their body strong enough, keep their fitness high enough to actually soak up a punch and like take a few hits. There's not a lot of people like that anymore. So I can't keep the doors open if those are my only students. I've got a couple.
I've been through that.
I think.
Well,
you
know,
yeah,
I'm guilty about what I'm about to say. And like I always talk about street fights, and that's because that's what me growing up, we all knew what a street fight was. Okay. And
Right.
It's different now. I mean, now there'll be two guys pushing each other chest to chest, like at a bar or something. And I guess technically it's a street fight, but it's safe. It's nothing. And that's like saying I practice medicine. Well, just saying you practice medicine. Well, what medicine do you practice? There's different stuff, just like with street fighting. And when I mention street fights, I'm always talking deadly shit, deadly encounters. Okay. What you're going to somebody's going to die, because that's what I was exposed to. So I do know martial artists, legit guys, nice guys who've been in quote unquote street fights, I guess, but not serious. Like I just saw a video on the internet of a pro fighter that got into a quote unquote street fight. It wasn't. It was against. I mean, it was a guess, yeah, but it was some kid that knew nothing. Was not even a threat. Kid didn't even do anything, and he gets choked out. Yeah, technically it's a street fight, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about where, we're going to get into this next week on the podcast for William, if you're still listening, William. But yeah, there's layers, as you know this, Jesse, layers of what a street scenario could be.
There are many layers. And
yeah,
when people come to me and ask me that question, like, will you teach me self-defense? I'm like, I mean, I can teach you how to get out of mugging on the north side. But like, you want to be like John Wick or something like that. I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, this is a sword fighting school. We do knives and wrestling and punching, and some of it will hold up pretty well, and some of it is a bad idea. I can tell you which stuff you should not try to do if somebody's actually got a knife, especially with, little, like, the medieval knife is like 14 inches long. These are giant pig stickers. It's a different fish than like a pocket knife or a kitchen knife that's only 4 or 5 inches long.
Yeah.
Very different fish. And, knight in shining armor's got freaking heavy duty gloves on, basically, if he's in public at all times. Because, 600 years ago, if you had money, you wore it on your body. Your clothes represented your quality and your station in life way more than even today. You see a guy nowadays walking down the street in Armani, you're like, why is that guy going, you know, probably the neighborhood I grew up in, like, was out in the sticks. You didn't go to church wearing Armani on Sunday. you know, you put on your clean jeans and a sweater, and putting on airs was, nowadays that means something else, right? But 600 years ago, no, you wore your best clothes out in public most of the time because you were aspiring to be respected. And that was a demonstration of wealth, which meant something different than it does today. It was, demonstrating your wealth was critical to your social position. So you had money for gloves, you wore gloves in the summertime. You did it all the damn time.
Well, and the
And
Italian cultures historically we're proud people.
yeah,
As
absolutely.
others are. We're not like we don't have the corner. We didn't corner the market. I'm being proud. But
There's a
yeah,
very specific flavor to that pride, though.
yes. Well, absolutely. And it was generally a legitimate sort of source of pride.
Absolutely.
They could back up whatever their pride was, whatever it was that they did.
Right. I
They were
mean, it's a merit based system, especially like
merit based. There you go.
the
Yeah.
end of the medieval times was humanism was coming out. So like you didn't have to stay up if you were born a dirt farmer, you didn't have to stay a dirt farmer necessarily. If you were smart, you could find a skill and leverage it and move up in the world. Maybe join a guild and make shoes. That's, my seventh great grandfather. That's how we got out of the Black Forest. He was just a hillbilly living at the foot of the Alps, and then they started making shoes, and then they made their way into a shoemaking guild, and then they got enough money, and they moved up further, and they got more money, and that's a real thing. And lifting yourself up like that is something you should be proud of. And if you demonstrate that by dressing a certain way, then that's okay. Um, I think people should be proud of the things they accomplish in this life, and there's never anything wrong with that. If one of my coaches once joked to people like, "Oh man, you've got like the best right cross I've ever seen," and he's like, "Spent 35 years throwing this right cross. It
Yeah.
should be good.
Yeah.
It should be good by now. If it wasn't good by now, what have I been doing for 35 years?" And it's
Yeah.
true. The guy had the best right cross I've seen in my entire life. Knock out a horse with that shot. But I mean, I'm exaggerating there, but I mean, it was a hell of a right cross. And you bootstrap your way up in the world, you should be proud. You're preserving catch wrestling because there's not a lot of guys around doing it anymore, right?
Right.
And that lineage lives inside you. And I know you've got some video out there. I'm gonna try and talk my boss into getting you to write a book or writing one for you, writing one with you, ghostwriting it or something, just to get it out there in the world because you've done so much work. You don't want that to. It'd be sad if that left the world. Um, it's. I've been looking for a protege for basically the last 16 years. I haven't found one yet. I want to though, because
Yeah, I know what you mean
44.
there. And I've said this before on podcasts. I mean, this is not a jar, it's just the truth. No one that I've trained knows everything I know.
No,
No, they don't, because most of them, especially 20 years ago or whatever, 30 years ago now, shit, in the 90s, everybody just wanted to learn the grappling. And I'm so much more than that. And then it got even watered down from there because then it was like, well, these moves are too severe. We got to slow it down for the tournaments. So it got watered down. But I want to touch back a little bit on, instead
Yeah.
of talking about me, I want to get back to Italy here.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the things about Italians, or the country Italy, or not, the region of Italy, I should say, because it hasn't been a country all that long,
No.
is that there was a lot of craftsmen, a lot of artistic stuff. You think of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, and Galileo, scientists, and the beautiful architecture and the music and the food. And these are artisans, these are craftsmen, okay? Skills that some cultures, their skill set may have been something different, right? So there was always that sense of, you had tangible pride, okay, is what I'm trying to get at, where you could see or hear the beauty. So not only was it something worthwhile as far as like building a house, it was a beautiful house, or the painting was in that house, and it's a beautiful painting that brought you years of pleasure.
Well,
So,
yeah.
you know,
That's the modern world is losing that idea. Italy got real rich in the 1300s. Well, they started getting rich in the 1100s, but they got real rich by the 1300s. They probably controlled a third of Europe's wealth at the time, and they were fighting little wars to see who could control the most of that internally to the region. But then what do you do with that money? If you have all this money, you have all this power, but who gives a crap if you know it's going to go away when you die? So a lot of these guys, when they would amass this power and this money, they'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to find the best artist around, and I'm just going to pay the guy to do art. I'm going to find a musician. I'm just going to pay him to do music, and I'm going to open it up to my city so that the people who live in my city like living here, and it's worth living here, and they can find some pride in being here because this place is beautiful and good. And they can take pride in knowing that there's good artists who live here. And when I talk about wearing the clothes, like, you take pride in knowing that the guy in your city who makes shoes is the best shoemaker in 200 miles.
yeah,
And your shoes are going to last 10 years because they're freaking good. And why is that guy living in your city? Because the guy who runs your city makes sure that the taxes are low and that there is money in the coffers. The streets are paved and the water's turned on. And that was the pride. And that in today's world, it's very short-lived. I take a lot of pride in some of my students hire me for private lessons because we teach classes, but then they're like, oh, I want to
Mhm.
know a little more. I want to refine it. And sometimes I'll be working with a guy and I'll say something about how the swords interact, some little twist or turn of fencing, and they're like, dude, like the other coach never said that. I'm like, oh, I mean, this is just an assumed thing. Like this is just some little thing that they're like, no, like it never occurred to me. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like I learned that about 5 years in, and like I just kind of do it automatically now. I forgot that's a thing you had to learn. So let's double back and like get that skill. Like we talked about timing earlier. Like at this point, I would probably say, to quote the old movie, like you probably got crackerjack timing. Like a guy moves, you probably don't have to think about where to go, right?
Oh
You
yeah,
just you
right.
just know how to catch the
50
moment.
years, yeah.
And human intuition that people develop over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, it shows. And that's why the old gray hair guys who've been training since they were kids are just freaking good. Why was Michael Jordan so good at basketball? The guy just trained all the time. He never stopped. And like, was he born good? He was born with a damn good body. Absolutely. But it was the lifetime of super dedicated practice that took a guy who was born good to become absolutely amazing, right? And it's like that with any skill. You get a guy who makes shoes, you know, I bet you and I could go and sew a pair of shoes. They wouldn't be great, but we could probably
Yeah.
figure it out. Um, but then there's that guy who makes them his whole life. Like I think about my great grandpa who made shoes, and it's like made shoes for freaking 60 years. and they were damn good shoes, and that's how I started. That was my my great grandpa made stoves,
Mm.
but that guy could weld. That guy could weld like nobody's business. He could put together a potbelly stove like 10 a day, all by himself. Now we don't use those anymore, but the guy was good at it, right? My grandfather's twin brother was a baker. Spent his whole life in St. Louis making bread,
Mm.
and by the end of it, he could do it in his sleep. That's how you
Yeah,
get good. You do it. You
yeah,
develop
right.
your intuition. You learn little things, minutia that people who don't go deep never learn. And that's what you need in a protege. That's why I always like, if anybody's watching this podcast, they want to come learn sword fighting. I'm like, look, I'll teach you super cheap if you just come and train for 20 years.
Yeah.
Just come and work out all the time, and I'll get you real good. But I need you to take up the torch when I'm too old to hold it anymore.
Well, I've been around some of the world's best musicians,
I
right?
know you
So
have.
yeah, and I mean, and I'm nowhere near, I mean, you don't even mention my name around them because, it's like that, it's ridiculous. They're leaps and bounds so much superior. And they all have that. But the thing is, when you get good at something, like they appreciated my abilities, with the athletics, the fighting, because it's all the same. That the dedication, that that you got to put in X amount of hours per day, per week, per month, and that this is a lifestyle. This is not something that, hey, I'm going to do this for 6 months. You're
No,
going to do this for the rest of your life until you're dead. Um, and so when I see these guys, and then I started. This is when I was like early 20s. Then I started looking at people that had absolutely nothing to do with what I was interested in. Right, just shit that I did not care about, and but they were experts at what they did, and they had the same traits.
yep.
Of the dedication, the hard work, the burning desire to get great. So there's that commonality. And you're right about the protege. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody that has these traits that may be undeveloped, but they're there.
Right.
And if they got those traits, they're going to succeed. Hopefully they'll succeed in sword fighting. If that just
If
isn't
that's
for
what they
them,
want,
it'll
I'm
be
here for
something.
it.
Yep. Yeah,
I mean,
good.
I don't want what we do to fade from the world. Like one of the reasons I want to bring you out here is to expose you to a bunch of different people, expose you to my network of martial arts
Yeah.
people, and maybe one of those guys, like, I'm gonna learn and get better at what I do, and maybe one of those guys will wander off and go into the weeds with you and get good at your catch, and
Yeah, I
learn and
wish.
take that
Well, we're
stuff.
definitely coming out. I'll come out. Joe will be there. Who knows? We may
Yeah,
have a
we'll
little
set
Pied
something
Piper
up
thing.
for later in the summer or the
Yeah,
fall, for
yeah, for sure.
sure. Um, but that's always what we're looking for.
Well, why don't you tell everybody where you're actually located?
So we're on the north side of the city. We're at 4437 Ravenswood Avenue, to plug the address. So we're like
Yeah.
Montrose and Ashland, basically. I'm right by the Brown Line stop, and we've been here for 12 years now. We just opened an archery range. The other side of the wall that you can't see on camera, there's an archery range we just opened up,
Sweet.
and yeah,
What are
we're
your
the
hours? What are your days?
So we're open. Our regular classes are Monday and Wednesday, or Tuesday and Thursday, depending on what your favorite kind of sword is. Archery is Monday. Well, open range is like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, and Saturday. The classes are Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Saturday mornings. So if you know nothing about it, you can come in, and there's a guy. We rent the equipment. The guy will teach you stuff. He's really good. I think he took fourth in the Midwestern regionals this year for bare bow shooting,
Hmm.
which is like a hunting bow, basically. It doesn't
Okay.
have all the weird sticks and sights and weights and stuff on it. It's just a bow. And then there's the Olympic shooting. Those guys have all the doodads all over their bow and arrow, and it looks like some kind of high tech craziness.
Yeah, those look weird. I don't like them.
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to shoot one here, but our guy doesn't teach that. Because he's just like, no, it's a bow and arrow. It's a curved stick and a straight stick and a string, and you're gonna learn it the old-fashioned way. But he's real good, and certainly our sword fighting, like, we One of our kids just took second in a tournament down in Georgia a few weeks ago. We had some people make it to the finals in Icebreaker last week. We're going to the Ars Gladii Open, which is a tournament in Detroit next week. We host one every January. So people can get good if they want to do competitive sword fighting here. Certainly, like our tournament team goes around and everybody in the Midwest knows who they are. They're not a bunch of scrubs who just get their butt kicked everywhere they go.
Cool.
I did want to make a couple of serious comments before, and then I'm going to switch gears to something
Yeah.
else. But just thinking back, because two things that are very important to me, they all kind of fall in the same thing, is kind of preserving that cultural legacy. I mean, the reason why I do this podcast, I mean, it's definitely not to hang with Tony, but it's to preserve, it's to preserve that knowledge, because that is part of our cultural heritage, and it's valuable.
Yes.
And, to Tony's point about saying, well, I've had a lot of good students at varying levels, we've had some great guys come in, but no one's been my protege to carry this on. And that's scary that, even though I said lots of your knowledge is out there with videos and things like that, but no one has the whole system down there. I mean, really, there should be multiple people who have that so they can pass it down, because one person could get hit by a bus, so in an ideal circumstance, you'd want a cadre of people to say, this is going to take it to the next generation. And so getting the word out there obviously is something that's very important to me. And then along those lines, you mentioned a book, and I think it's funny that you mentioned that, because that crossed my mind in our previous conversation. You talked about how there was only like 3 remaining copies, from the Middle Ages, from granted, printing press technology and all that stuff wasn't, they're hand copying things.
No, Fiore predates that.
Yeah. So, but the idea to me that like most of your information, Tony, is out there, it's digital. So there's, whether it's, even if going back to VHS tapes or whatever that your stuff started on, that requires a certain kind of technology that theoretically could disappear. I mean,
Yeah, but more so, a lot of what I know is not digitized. There, as you know, when you go to these workshops, I show things that I've never put on video. And that's the thing, that's the stuff that no one will ever get. If I drop dead today, no one's going to know this. Because like Jesse was saying earlier about like some gaps in the knowledge because of the books and not everything, like they don't remember this word, this language is archaic. They don't have the Rosetta Stone. There's a lot of what I teach. Nobody can fill in the blanks because they don't
Right.
know. And it's not their fault. It's, I didn't put it out on video because there's reasons. Number one, it's not.
Well, there's a
main thing is-
finite limit. There's a
Well,
finite
there's a
limit
limit.
to what you can put in a book or a
and-
video.
or even on video, but
Right.
but the people have, and this isn't just directed strictly like I'm the only one. Because of digital piracy, they've ruined it for themselves, because many artists, not just martial artists, but artists, writers, musicians, they don't want to do this anymore because they're getting ripped off. They
Oh,
lose
yeah.
money.
It's
And
hard.
it's hard, right? I'm fighting with a company now that owes me money, that's selling my products that they're not supposed to. I told them, don't sell my products. They're not responding to me, okay? To my emails. Joe's going to reach out to them. They're not responding to me. But yes, the digital piracy has ruined me for years. Financially, it just killed.
Oh, it's
I'm
soul
dead.
crushing, man.
Oh yeah, people don't get it. They think they're entitled. So that's part of it. But also, there's people want to be ood and odd, and the most important things that you can learn are not the ooh and ah. Okay, it's the principles, it's the little moves that set up everything. It's the strategies, it's this and that, like you would do in your fencing and your grappling instruction. And some people don't want that. They just want to be that. You could tell, because on YouTube or something, people are always coming up with these new moves. There are no new moves. Those moves will not work against somebody skilled, simply because they're masters of their body. There's just show setup, show something innovative that can work repeatedly.
I talk about the laboratory when I'm here training people, and to that last point, like I get guys all the time. They'll be like, "Well, what if I did this?" And I'm like, "Son, we're in the lab right now. we've created a very specific set of conditions so you can practice something very specific. But I'm going to tell you right now, I see what you're asking me. And if you would like to just try that on me in a match, you go right ahead, and you're not going to like what happens. Because when you're training, it's very easy to what the other guy's going to do. You're building predictable situations,
Yeah.
and it's very easy to get comfortable with that predictability and imagine that this thing that you can do against this very predictable subject could work at any time and any place. But very often that's bullshit. And you don't want to fall into the trap of your own bullshit. And so if ever I have those thoughts, I'll wait a week or two. I'll get a different guy and I'll be like, all right, man, we're going to wrestle this out. I'm going to try some shit. Feel free to, we're sparring. So just feel free to tune me up if you get the opportunity, okay? I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to try to pull off. If it comes up, I'll try it. If it doesn't come up, not your fault. And if it comes up and you jack me in the face, then I'm back to the drawing board. But the laboratory doesn't have any pressure. Even sparring only has a limited amount of pressure. It only can test to a degree. Because the situation, if somebody's got a knife in front of you, if somebody's here to knock your teeth out, all of them, if they want to take a brick to you, there's a lot of different pressure there, and different things are going to happen, and you can't account for that in the laboratory,
Nor should you, because you could what if this till you're blue in the face. I mean, same like languages. Yeah, I remember, this is kind of funny, but when I was younger, I used to be kind of, I'll be honest with you, I was popular, and a lot of guys kind of wanted to hang out with me because, girls, right, Tony? So they would ask me, well, what do you say to a woman? Well, I never had anything prearranged. It was just, whatever. Well, what if they say this? Or what if they do that? It's one of those deals. Dude, just go with
There's no magic word.
No. But at least with the human language, you develop a vocabulary. You should be able to think on your feet.
Right.
With techniques, you're limited. There's only a limited amount of techniques. And the thing is, many people can't think on their feet with those techniques. They're used to doing them rote. Okay.
Right.
If he moves this way, I move that way. You got to break out of that.
That ain't fighting. That is not fighting.
Right. Exactly right.
And it's very easy to fall into that trap. And in my case, I have to train people up from the very beginner. They've never even played a sport. They didn't play baseball growing up. This is the first activity they've done, and they're 25, and they're about as strong as a boiled potato. And I've got to build these people up from no background to something as far as they want to take it. And as I've said, if people show me passion, I don't care where they start. If they're willing to train and practice and work, I'll take them from potato to steel bar. I'll build their fitness. I'll teach them to fight. I don't care. I'll give them everything I've got. And there's some people who are just here more casually, and that's totally okay. We live in a modern world where people want to exercise and get their entertainment in one place. And if they're here to casually do this, that's great. That's fine. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And for those people who are more casual, they'll be like, oh, how am I doing? I'm like, for a guy who's casually invested, you're doing really well. Or maybe I'll say, if it's not true, I won't say it. But, I have no problem with saying, you're casually invested and you're doing well for how much time you're putting in.
That's a good assessment.
Yeah. And if that's all it's an honest assessment, but not a cruel one. Because I'm not here to be cruel. I'm here to keep the doors open, and I'm here to keep my art alive, and I'm here to love what I do. I love the lifestyle I get to live. Is it a lavish? No. Do I have money? Not really. But it is fun and honest, and we do get to work with people. But for the folks who are like, oh, Jesse, what technique would have fixed my sparring? I'm like, no, what would have fixed your sparring was having better footwork. A would have fixed your sparring was learning to catch timing, would have been being more observant. Like keep it simple. Fights don't get won with fancy shit. They get won with 2 parries and 1 thrust, and that's it. Like a friend of mine in Germany years ago, um, he doesn't like the tournament scene. He's just a scrappy fight guy, but he likes to do swords. He's from the old days where people just used to go around and just pick sword fights to see if you were any good. So somebody told him, "Oh, well, you suck because your students don't go to these tournaments." And he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna train up a guy. I'll send him next year." Pulls a kid off the street and, "Hey, you want to learn sword fighting? I'll teach you for free for a year as long as you go to this tournament." Teaches the kid three mechanics, not even technique, just timing, how to parry, how to thrust. Nothing special. Kid goes out, gets 3rd place his first time out. And they're like, "Oh, you must be some savant." He's like, "Nah, I just did what the boss said.
Yeah.
I just did this thing. Turns out it works pretty good." And he had good sense of timing. That's all they worked for that year, was just getting an understanding of timing so that he could deliver the one thing he knew how to do. And it worked out great. Turns out having one punch that works real good is better than having 1,000 punches. Having 1 or 2 lockups that work real good is better than having 1,000 lockups. Because you're not going to do 1,000 lockups in an actual fight. You're going to do 1. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you're pulling something out of your butt to get this fight over right now. You ain't got time to show this guy 1,000 things. He's going to try to hurt you. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the secret to it. When it comes to the books and videos, like that stuff doesn't hold all the nuanced data. I've seen people try it and you end up with like a 20 hours of video. It's still incomplete. When the old masters wrote these books, there's 1530, Achille Marozzo writes his Opera Nova. And actually his son who published it. It was just 20 years of notes that his son organized into a book. It's a "Dad, you got to make money. Publish this book." And it very clearly states that this is not complete. And that if you really want to understand what's in this book, you got to go train with a guy who knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Because there's more to doing this than can ever be written down. And there's more to learning than a book's ever going to give you. Videos are great, but really they're just fancy books at the end of the day. They show you the same thing over and over. You can rewind it as many times as you want, but only what's there is what's there. There's no more, there's no less. You can do 20 different videos. That's a big book. But like I said earlier, I'm sure there's times when you're showing somebody how to do something and there's something that you've taken for granted for 30 years that you're like, "Oh, yeah, that, yeah." But that guy's new and doesn't know it. And that's not something that would necessarily even make it into a book.
Right. Positioning or weight distribution, things like that. You don't, yeah.
It's
Exactly.
so easy. And those things are so broad that even if you do talk about it in a book, you could write a whole book about it.
Yeah.
And it probably wouldn't be complete. It would just be better than a less complete book. So at the end of the day, these kinds of sports that we do, these kinds of fighting that we do, these traditions, one, in my mind, catch wrestling is part of the European martial arts. Well, it's part of the Western world. And to me, it's America's true martial art. It's what comes out of American fighting.
Yep.
And we didn't have to, people talk about MMA and like, "Oh, well, Thai kickboxing is the best boxing, so that's why we made it MMA." It's like a guy was able to sell that style of boxing really well, so it made a lot of money. Is it the absolute best? I don't know. Is it pretty good? Certainly, I like watching it on TV, and certainly those guys are very, very good at what they do. But when you're watching a guy in a gladiator pit, you want to see what the guy did, right? If you're a spectator, you want to see. And suddenly, if you're a guy who's making money off the spectators, you want a boxer where the crowd can see those punches hit the other guy. And that might have some influence on what goes into that octagon. What can the crowd see? What can the crowd relate to? BJJ 20 years ago was really good to be watched by a crowd because those guys wanted to work one lock. They get their guard, they get in their position, and they start working something. They might change their mind after a moment, but they would work pretty hard for longer than I would to try on to get one tie up or one lock. As where, with me, if I try to lock up your arm and you get out of it, I'm going to your other arm. I'm going to your face. I'm going to your leg. I'm going to abandon all failures and attack the new opening, whatever's becoming available. And it's not fun to watch because I'm just move, 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 move. New target, new target, new target. I'm not waiting. I'm not going to sit here and struggle with some guy. My fitness is pretty good, but theirs might be better. I'm 44. I'm not 20 anymore. I don't want to struggle with some guy over an armbar for 5 minutes till I get tired.
Yeah.
And, you watch some of those MMA videos, you see that guy in Brazil a couple of years ago ate a knife in the balls when he tried that. He's working his armbar. This guy just fishes a knife out of his pocket, left-handed, and stabs him in the dick 3 times.
Well,
great
that's a whole
armbar, bro.
subject for another movie. Yeah.
Well,
Or
yeah.
for another episode. Yeah. Because grappling in a street scenario is not the smartest thing to do, but, yeah, no, you're right. It's bottom line is those things, they're entertainment. And not only what's in the ring, but what is your personality like? All of it, right? It's entertainment first and foremost. Okay. If nobody's watching, the business is going to fold up.
Right.
So you got to bear that in mind. Not that the guys aren't skilled or something.
No.
You're right.
I'm never going to take away from a guy's skills. Like, those guys are good. I'm not pretending they're not. I'm just thinking about how it got to look the way it looks.
Yeah, it's showbiz, right? So
some guys got to work, right?
Well, think back to Muhammad Ali, who kind of changed the face of boxing, with his mouth, right? With his showmanship. In addition to his skills, but it was the Louisville lip. That's what they called him, it kind of, the story is that, he basically patted himself off of Gorgeous George, the wrestler. Okay.
Yeah.
That pattern, that shtick. So it was all about, let me draw people in. So,
that's what gets you paid.
That's what gets you paid,
That's what gets you paid.
So, yeah. But yeah, no, for sure, with Joe, I was actually at your gym years ago, just not to work out, but there was an instructor there at the time that wanted to meet me or something. I'm sorry, I just don't remember names, but Joe was with me. But I got the nickel tour. I don't even think there was a class going on, was there, Joe?
No, I think we were kind of early in the afternoon, however we worked it out. Yeah, so it's before things were starting to kick in.
Yeah, I wouldn't even remember how to get there, to be honest with you. But you'd know, but because Joe, you know everything. But yeah, no, this is awesome though. We're getting late here now. We're gonna have to start wrapping this up.
You got any last questions for me, Joe, before we gotta wind down?
Well, nothing that's short term. Like when we had our warm up talk before, I wanted to get into the forging of steel implements, but we don't have time to get into that again. So I'll do that as kind of a teaser for possibly a future episode.
Yeah, bring me back sometime. We could talk. I do make knives and swords. You have to pull them off my Instagram. I didn't bring any over to the club today, but
they can check you out on social media, right? The stuff you
do.
Jesse
Kulla Forges with underscores between Jesse and Kulla there. And I'll pop you a link right now. You can post it up later on. I'll put it in the chat. But
how are you with hundreds?
Huh?
How are you with hundreds? If you're a forger, can you work with $100 bills? I could use some help with that.
You don't want me trying to draw you up money, man, unless it's like I can make you counterfeit gold coin from the old days. Modern money, man, that's outside of my skill set.
Oh shit. Well, no, for sure. We want to have you back on soon. You know, we can work, excuse me. We can work something out soon because, it'd be great to have you on to continue this and get
Yeah,
into
I
the
would love to
forging
do
and
it,
stuff.
and I'll talk
Yeah, for
knives all
sure.
night. I'm a mildly obsessed with that stuff. It's
Well, let's do that. Let's set that subject matter as knives.
okay. We'll do it.
Joe, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, it's just really exciting to have you guys to meet again and talk. I think you have a very birds of a feather kind of approach, like-mindedness, I guess, as far as you know, the purpose of your art and the martial side of it, and keeping the street thing front and center, you know, regardless of what your tradition is. And so I think, you know, I kind of knew you guys would hit it off, and always interesting to talk. And like I said, I've really enjoyed getting to know Jesse. You know, I've obviously seen him, but never had the time to really talk. So this was very cool.
Well, it's
Well,
great for me. I
yeah.
love you guys are fun. I really do feel like we get along well, and I just look
Oh,
forward to getting some training in the future.
that'll work. Well, everybody, we will see. We'll talk next week about the upcoming seminars for May. Yeah, because we'll do that next week. There will be the 2 seminars in May. We'll give you the dates. Well, they're not seminars, they're workshops. But but anyway, everybody, thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.